All right, let's just dive right in. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating, honestly kind of mind-bending 2019 essay. It's called The Purer, the More Stable by an author named Zugfen. Now, the objective of this text is absolutely massive. It basically tries to take the hard science of chemistry, the ancient lore of Roman mythology, and the gritty realities of modern geopolitics, and tie them all together into one giant unifying theory of everything. It's a pretty wild ride of inductive reasoning, so let's just jump straight into the evidence they present.
Picture this, January 2019. The British Daily Mail reports this incredibly bizarre anomaly up in Alaska. A resident has 2 bottles of water sitting in their attic. It's the dead of winter, the temperature has plummeted to a bone-chilling negative 22 degrees Celsius, and yet the water in those bottles is completely 100% liquid. Literally not a single ice crystal in sight. Crazy, right? Well, the science world has a name for this. It's called supercooling. And it happens when a liquid is just exceptionally pure. You see, without any microscopic impurities or tiny dust particles for the ice crystals to grab onto, the freezing process basically stalls out. The water just stays liquid way below its normal freezing point. But here is what's really interesting about this text. The author doesn't just treat this as some fun bit of science trivia. No, this physical anomaly, this undeniable, tangible strength found in absolute purity, that becomes the launchpad for their entire worldview.
So that brings us to Section 1, Nature's Pure Anomalies, the Feral Child. The author pivots immediately from the chemistry of water straight into biology, drawing this incredible parallel to human infants. To make the case for biological purity, they walk us through this mix of myth and history where dangerous wild beasts inexplicably refuse to harm babies. You've got the famous Roman myth of Romulus and Remus, right? Infant twins tossed into a river only to be saved and nursed by a female wolf. But it's not just myth. Fast forward to India in 1920, the Mindipur girls. 2 naked children found safely wandering right behind 3 adult wolves, and by the 1950s, science had actually documented 30 distinct cases of feral children being raised by beasts. The text is basically claiming that human infants emit this pure, uncorrupted nature that acts like a shield, completely pacifying apex predators. And if you look at the 1950s data, it is remarkably specific. We're talking 14 kids raised by wolves, 5 by bears, 10 by monkeys and sheep, and, get this, 1 astonishing case of a child raised by a literal leopard. The author uses this breakdown to build their broader case. I mean, if a leopard or a bear, creatures driven purely by predatory instinct, will actually nurture a human child instead of eating it, the text argues that the child must possess some tangible force field of pure innocence. Okay, moving on to Section 2, the core principle, purity versus complexity.
Here's where the essay distills all those wild stories into a really strict binary way of looking at the world. Pure equals stable, complex equals unstable. It's that simple. According to the author, value and stability are totally dependent on things being unmixed. Take gemstones, for example. Higher purity universally means higher financial value, right? Impurities ruin the stone. The text then applies this exact same logic to human personalities. It suggests that simple, pure people are just naturally more likable, while highly complex people tend to face rejection. And then it loops right back to chemistry, pointing out that complex reactive elements are just inherently volatile.
To really hammer home this chemistry connection, the essay specifically calls out the noble gases from the periodic table: helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon. Why focus on these guys? Because they are the introverts of the chemical world. They are completely unmixed, and they practically never react with the stuff around them. They are inherently pure, which makes them incredibly stable and virtually immune to outside influences.
Let's see how this builds in Section 3, Purity and Spirituality Returning to Infancy.
So now we jump from the periodic table straight into world theology. The author brings together 2 vastly different spiritual heavyweights, Jesus Christ and the ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. Jesus says you have to become a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. Lao Tzu says you must return to the state of infancy to unite with the Tao. It's a really fascinating neutral observation the text makes here. Both of these foundational figures are essentially demanding the exact same thing. Displaying your pure, unadulterated nature, like a baby, is the one real requirement for spiritual salvation.
But here is where it gets pretty controversial and totally uncompromising. Because if purity is the only metric that matters for the afterlife, look at what the text claims does not matter. Knowledge and wisdom? Irrelevant. Studying classic books or following specific religions? Doesn't matter. Good deeds, spreading the truth, making pilgrimages, none of it counts. The author objectively strips away all the complex layers of religion and just bluntly asserts that heaven relies entirely on your absolute purity. Not what you do, not how smart you are, just purity.
Which leads us right into Section 4, when complexity causes collapse.
Now the text shifts gears from individual spirituality to the macro level. What happens when this complexity infects larger systems? Well, according to the author, corporate collapse always follows a strict three-step trajectory. Step 1. Pure origins. A company starts with one simple focus, like, say, just making good food. It thrives because it's pure. Step 2. Impure diversification. They start dabbling. They get into politics, buy up real estate, play the stock market. And step 3. Inevitable decline. The whole business scope becomes a tangled, complex mess. By adding complex interests to a pure foundation, the text argues that failure is basically mathematically guaranteed.
And the author boldly applies this exact same logic to global geopolitics, specifically pointing to a list of collapsed or unstable socialist states: Romania, Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, Venezuela, Vietnam, and China. Now, impartial observation is absolutely crucial here. The author is not arguing that pure socialism is a bad economic model. Actually, they're suggesting pure socialism is superior. Their argument is that these specific nations collapsed precisely because they let their systems get impure. The original pure idea was corrupted by adding capitalist markets, party interests, and greed. The complexity itself is what destroyed the stability.
There's a quote in the essay that just brilliantly hits the nail on the head regarding systemic corruption. Flies always find the cracked eggs. As long as that eggshell is completely uncracked and pure, it's safe. The flies literally have nowhere to land. But the second you introduce a tiny crack, a new complexity, a secondary motive, an impurity, that is exactly what lets the flies of corruption take hold and rot the whole thing from the inside out. To ground all of this massive, sweeping philosophy in reality, the author actually drops in a personal anecdote. They founded an organization called Lifechanyuan, and they noticed a really distinct pattern. The members who possessed complex thoughts, they were constantly disturbed by outside factors, and inevitably, they always left. But the people who stayed loyal and stable, the simple thinkers. The author presents this first-hand observation as their final, undeniable proof.
All right, that leads us right into the final stretch. Section 5, the final paradox.
If we actually follow this purity equals stability logic all the way to its extreme endpoint, we arrive at a genuinely shocking conclusion. Think about it. If purity is stability, who is the absolute most unstable, unreliable person on Earth? According to the text, it's someone with these traits: highly knowledgeable, a complex thinker, deeply experienced and involved in society, flexible, and mindful. Yeah. The stark reality here is that the very traits our modern society celebrates and rewards are the exact same traits that make a person inherently unstable. The essay argues that a complex mind will swear loyalty to you today and then use its brilliant intellect to rationalize betraying you tomorrow. So what does this all mean? We are left with this huge, provocative question derived straight from the author's final assertion. Is the most complex, experienced mind actually the most foolish? It completely challenges everything we are taught about growth, education, and getting ahead in the world. I mean, if the universe really does favor the pure and the simple, from supercooled Alaskan water to wolves raising babies to the afterlife to the fate of entire nations, then maybe our endless obsession with complexity is actually our biggest mistake. It's a wildly fascinating lens to view the world through, and definitely something to ponder in your own life. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. See you next time.